daughters of his two closest allies, Abu Bakr and Omar. Abu Bakr's daughter, Aisha, would become one of the most influential women in his life.
Aisha was very lively. She was brilliant. She was somebody that questioned the Prophet. She was not somebody in any way that took everything. She questioned him. She said, what does that mean? Why did you do this? Why did you do that? She was somebody that really had an incredibly active mind. She memorized vast amounts of prophetic traditions, and she's considered to be actually the transmitter of a large number of traditions from the Prophet Muhammad.
In the year that followed the Battle of Uhud, the Meccans girded themselves for a final assault that they hoped would finish off the Muslims once and for all. They assembled one of the largest armies ever seen in Arabia and marched on Medina. But Muhammad hit upon a daring defense.
Muhammad has dug a trench around the whole of the settlement, and you have an almost comic scene with the Meccan cavalry galloping up to this trench and pulling back in horror and saying, what is this? They've never seen anything so unsporting in their lives. This is something, they say, the Arabs don't do. It sounds comical, but surrounded by the powerful Meccan army, the Muslims were expecting all to be killed, to a man, to a woman.
Stopped by the trench around Medina, the Meccans laid siege to the city and to the hundreds of Muslim families trapped inside. According to Muslim sources, in their determination to defeat Muhammad, the Meccans had recruited as allies many Bedouin tribes, as well as the largest Jewish tribe within Medina, the Bani Qurayza. For the Muslims, this defection was the final blow in a relationship that had been strained from the beginning.
When Muhammad came to town, the organized Jewish community did not accept his prophecy. There were, according to the Islamic sources, some individual Jews that did accept him. But for the most part, the community as a whole did not.
If the Jews would accept his prophethood, then he has tremendous and complete confirmation of his prophethood. But the Jews were so well respected that when they rejected his prophethood, and they did it actively, they became a very serious political threat to his very existence in Medina.
Despite the aid of the Bani Qurayza, the Meccan siege could not break through the Muslim defenses. When the weather turned bad, the Bedouin tribes began deserting the field of battle. The Meccans themselves lost heart and departed, abandoning their Jewish allies to be tried by the Muslims for the crime of treason.
Islamic sources believe that the Jews did indeed aid the enemy in trying to defeat Muhammad. This was absolutely against the terms of the Medina agreement.
The Jews and the Muslims decided that they would choose an arbitrator to determine what would be the future of the Jews. The person who was chosen was a man who was mortally wounded in the Battle of the Trench. And so he determined that the women and children of the Banu Qurayza would be taken as slaves to the Muslims, and the men would be killed.
The Prophet agreed with this judgment. When he judged, he said that you have judged according to God and his messenger. And then approximately 700 men were killed. They were executed. So this definitely occurred.
All that can be said is that this cannot be seen as anti-Semitism per se. Muhammad had nothing against the Jewish people per se, or the Jewish religion. The Quran continues to tell Muslims to honor the people of the book and to honor their religion as authentic. And the Jewish tribes who had not rebelled, who had not given help to the Meccans, continued to live in Medina completely unmolested. Muhammad was not trying to exterminate Jews. He was trying to get rid of very dangerous internal enemies.
It's unfortunate that many historians, and particularly in contemporary times, both on the Jewish and on the Muslim side, have transformed this. On the Jewish side, they have used that as a way of saying, well, you see, Muslims hate the Jews and they kill them. And on the Muslim side, it says, well, you see, the Jews are full of treachery and can't be trusted. Both are wrong.
When the other tribes of the peninsula saw the impotence of Mecca with all its power and might against this little community, they began to switch allegiance and see that Muhammad was the coming man. Now, once that happened, once the tide had been turned after the Battle of the Trench, and the Muslims were no longer subject to the fear of extermination, Muhammad stopped the fighting.
The Prophet Muhammad received a few people, militants, who just arrived from one of the battles that they came back from, and they felt so important. We finished this job fighting with the enemies of Islam. And the Prophet smiled and he said, let me tell you something. You finished the minor jihad, and now you have the bigger jihad ahead of you. And they were stunned. They thought that they just finished the biggest achievement in their life by being willing to sacrifice their own life. And the Prophet explained that the biggest jihad is the struggle against your own desires and limitations.
Jihad does not mean holy war, primarily. The word means effort, striving, and it's always a hard struggle to put the word of God into practice. When the Quran talks about struggling, or they're not talking always about fighting a holy war, they're talking about this immense struggle to implement a divine imperative in the flawed and tragic conditions of daily life. Fighting might sometimes have to be done as part of the jihad, but it is by no means the major imperative.
I remember a quotation from Jesus, peace be upon him, who says that the first step in the reformation journey is to start with your own self. If you want to reform the society, you have to reform yourself first. And that's what basically the meaning of jihad.
The Prophet put that emphasis on the inner development, jihad, the constant struggle with yourself to improve yourself and perfect your intent, that you do things only for the sake of God. The most excellent jihad, holy struggle, is a struggle to control your ego, the self. For a long time I was deathly afraid of speaking in public, giving speeches. And I saw that and well, this is my jihad. I've got to overcome this fear. If I'm going to help people, it's going to be necessary for me to talk in public, to be able just to speak out. Going back to 1987, I'd become active as far as writing articles for papers to have fire-safe cigarette legislation enacted. Cigarettes are the largest cause of fire fatalities in the nation. So I began writing, and because of my position, I could speak from the authority as a firefighter and now a supervising fire marshal. Going back to, if you save one life, it's like you saved all humanity. Well, I feel I was part of an effort to save thousands of lives each year because of this legislation that we passed in New York State.
Jihad is misused. There is absolutely nothing in Islam that justifies the claim of Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, or other similar groups to kill innocent civilians. That is unequivocally a crime under Islamic law. Acts of terror violence that have occurred in the name of Islam are not only wrong, they are contrary to Islam.
September 11th, I hooked up with 2 other fire marshals. We found a place to park near the bridge, about several inches of soot. If it had been white and colder out, you would have sworn it was snow. We came over to Brooklyn Bridge. It was just like something out of a movie. It was very quiet, you know, that muffled sound that you have during a blizzard, you know, you can't hear your feet hitting around. It's just very muffled, very quiet. So we put on our turnout gear, and we started heading over there. And it's just, I think I could speak for all, but we were just all in a state of shock and disbelief. I just felt, in the back of my head, please don't be Muslims doing this. And I just felt sick. We could see this fragment of the World Trade Center sticking up almost like a lopsided crown. Then we started walking down one way, and we saw some firefighters, dazed and shell-shocked, saying, "Don't go down there, there's still more collapses happening." I mean, we're dying to go out there and do something. And, we're figuring that some of the brothers, or even anyone, people could still be alive, trapped under the rubble. But it was frustrating, but, I mean, you have to understand that they don't want to lose more people on top of the people who are lost already. This is just, it's just out-and-out madness, what they did. The Prophet himself, because of the circumstances, engaged in battle, in warfare, but he had a certain code of conduct that he followed. So you have to separate fanaticism, which every religion has, from the reality and the truth of that religion. These are fanatics who have lost sight of what the purpose of religion is, and they're acting, on their own. What hurt me probably most of all was out of the World Trade Center attack was that here is a religion that I entered because of the universality and the tolerance that is throughout the book and throughout the sayings of Prophet Muhammad. Yet these people who did that and were behind it and planned it were just so intolerant and so disregarding of their own tenets that they could do something so horrific and kill people in such a horrible manner. It was hard. It was hard because I just, that sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach. It's like, after you do all this work and you try so hard, now we've got to deal with this. And the Prophet says, if you're planting a tree and the end of the world comes, you finish planting the tree. It means you just keep on going. You got to keep trying to live your life according to what you believe in. And for me and others, try to keep this from ever happening again. September 11th underscored the need to have dialogue with non-Muslims and other faiths to understand each other and to try to resolve these hot spots that fester and cause this type of hatred.
The death and destruction in New York City that was caused by this terrible, terrible act in the name of Islam has propelled the Muslim community in New York to respond in many different ways. And one of the ways that I want to respond is the way the Prophet would have responded. To just talk about the humanity which we all belong to. Since September 11th, Muslims have gone to churches, to synagogues, to schools, to explain our faith. However, people still kept asking, where are the Muslims? And why aren't they doing something about it? So I started thinking about this, and I said, what is it that we are not doing right? Maybe we need to respond in a more gentle way. So I looked around for the mildest people in our community, the artists in our community. And the first person I called was Muhammad Zakaria.
Catastrophes have brought us here, but not all is lost. Through our art, we pick up all these broken pieces and try to put them back together again and make something that's going to work. Revenge, suicide bombing, things of that kind, they have no place in Islam. They must never have a place in Islam. Never. Never. Islam is really a soft thing. It's not a hard thing. And so we have to approach it with softness. And be soft to each other. Yasru wa la tu'asiru, the Prophet said. Make it easy and not difficult. So we should put away all those angry words, the harsh and strident rhetoric that we've been dealing with for all these years, that we've suffered to this sweet religion with this beastly stuff. And come out into the light and be bright. Be bright in America. and look in the mirror. That's what we have to do. Assalamu alaikum. This piece is the golden rule of Islam. It is the basis of the relations between people. It means there is no harming of other people in Islam and no returning or retaliating harm for harm. And so that's why I did it, to respond through the sayings of Muhammad the man.
By the year 628, the battles that had occupied the Muslims for the preceding 4 years had come to an end.
Once the Muslims were no longer fearing the threat of total extermination, Muhammad knew that the time for fighting had stopped, and it was now time to make an extraordinary initiative, a peaceful, non-violent initiative. He astonished the whole Muslim community and the whole community of Yathrib by announcing that he was going to go on the Hajj pilgrimage. Dangerous as it was, and enormously risky as it was, about 1,000 Muslims volunteered to go with Muhammad. All the rites were fulfilled to the letter. The camels all decked in their special sacrificial garments, the men all in their white garb.
The Muslims set out on the perilous trip to Mecca, crossing the vast desert without any arms to defend themselves. When they reached Hudaybiyah, just outside the sacred area around Mecca where violence was forbidden, Muhammad surprised his followers by ordering them not to enter, but to sit and wait. He then sent an emissary to Mecca seeking permission to complete the pilgrimage.
Muhammad knew, of course, that he was putting the people of Mecca into a really impossible position, because if they forbade Arabs to enter the city and perform the rites at the Kaaba, they would be abusing their position as guardians of the holy places. The Meccans themselves did not know what to do.
When the emissary did not return quickly, the Muslims feared the worst. But Muhammad's gambit paid off. The Meccans offered to negotiate a treaty. With tensions running high, Muhammad began dictating its first line by stating his own name.
Ali was taking down the notes with the Meccan negotiator at his side, and when Muhammad began saying, "The Prophet of God," the Meccan said, "I don't believe you're the Prophet of God. I can't sign to that."
So he said, "Fine, Muhammad, son of Abdullah." And many of the Muslims felt that this was a major insult.
The Muslims sitting round at Hudaybiyah watched this in utter dismay. There was almost a mutiny. 1,000 pilgrims stood refusing to accept this. Muhammad went back into his tent where he had his wife Salama, and he said to her, "What shall I do?" And she gave him some excellent advice. Part of the ritual of the Hajj was that you sacrifice a camel. And he went out and he sacrificed one of the camels, and somehow some kind of necessary tension was released.
The ritual sacrifice of an animal traditionally marked the end of the pilgrimage. Grudgingly